folks, it's time for another edition of Trace. As a matter of fact, this is of the season. So we're this week on a really strong note. This sales engineer is get into the demo section, and as always with getting trace, what we're doing, we're going to walk through a couple of and then we're going to hand things over and do it. And what we're going to do is we're going to have. So if you have questions, please feel, ask those questions away. We'll do our best to get started. Now, I understand there might be a little with the audio, folks. So the streaming through moment, but let's get started with the getting to know Dynatrace. Now, we always have these introductory segments, the new, and as always, segment of getting to know Dynatrace, recommend that you go to find out what's going on and what's new. Site you go to our blog site, so you go to, and everything that you could possibly trace is going to show up here, and content, all sorts of great articles that I would point to. You can see here that Bernd Greifenator, he has posted and talks about four observable leaders should have on their radars in 2020, a webinar that's going to be on this very topic. And so we're going to put into the chat window, grab that link. It's going to be there. It's going to be a really, I'm super looking forward to it. On the Dynatrace blog, there's also going on. As always with capabilities, new innovations every couple, a stream of new updates. And so I invite you to go read up and functionality that is being introduced to the Trace platform. This is probably one of the easy new. Is just go to the blog site, check out the new things that we have going on. That's of note. Our state ramp certification. This is actually really Dynatrace has achieved a certification. Allows public sector organizations trace to provide the service for those public sector applications. Something that's relatively new. We've already, so if you're a federal customer, this makes it very important for you as well. And there's also, I'm going to sort of jump out over to my browser, because talking a little bit about the Dynatrace experience. I've shared this post on. I love about Dynatrace is and this just sort of goes and show what gets me excited working with it. And that's things like this. Well, a culture night in our Vienna lab, and you had folks from different parts of the world in our office, and we just thought we'd share each other. And so it was a matter of bringing out food, and then we started talking about different trying out again different food culture. So it's so great to be able to have everyone together, being able to have these conversations, being able to. You can see here that we a little bit about our backgrounds and where we're from. We shared music, and so here you can see with the tabla, another guy going out with the guitar. Great time, and this is really what experience is all about. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger so everyone can. Great reasons why I love working at Dynatrace, and so I just wanted to make mention of that. It is the holiday season. We're all going to be family and loved ones over the holiday season. But this is something that we don't often talk. It's about the culture of the company, about the culture and the relationships that we have. And so it's absolutely interesting thing from our standpoint, because we're with people that work in financial services, with people that work in the public sector, another that work in the retail industry, another day in my industry. There's so many different organizations that utilize Dynatrace. From our standpoint, it's just great to have stations, and I just again mention that because we don't talk about it a lot on getting to know. That being said, now let's actually flip our presentation and go to the next Did You Know segment of getting to know. In the Did You Know segment, today, looking at here is, just want to make sure, is the new container view. And did you know a brand new container view? So what we found out was that when we have using Dynatrace and Kubernetes early on, there's a lot of the conversations with each other, and what we realized really that people that were working with container view that allowed them to be and understand things in that particular space. So if you're into Kubernetes, if you're into OpenShift, you want to be able to very quickly follow the K8 namespace or the container name or the pod name, and a brand new view, and we sort of the platform. It's now there on the left hand there. You'll be able to select containers, and what this is really cool and really useful for you to using your around K8s and around containers, find all of the different metrics and containers at a simple, easy to use container that you want, and it's going to provide you CPU usage, your M throttling, your CPU throttling for container and millicores. So all of the container information is now at your finger. That probably, you may have missed that about it, but that's the whole phrase is, did you know? And in this container view that's there, so if you're into Kubernetes, by all means, take advantage of there and see all of the around the containers. It's time for the best part. Oh no, getting ahead of myself. Before we get into Dynatrace, which is the demonstration, for since this is the of the season, and you won't. I do want to mention that is happening February 16th at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. It's a in-person event. There are waiting days, which I invite people to sign up for. I mentioned this in the past. I'm sure I have, but make sure as soon as possible, because fast. And so this session, we always get tremendous things. It's a great learning experience being used by other organizations. If you have the opportunity, perform in Las Vegas, February. And with that, let's get on to the best part of Dynatrace, and that is the demo. Is now we're going to Robert a bit about yourself and
Yep. So, hi, everybody. My name is Robert Stojan. I'm a sales engineer here at Dynatrace. I actually spent about 15 years on the client side. So, I worked for a number of large enterprises based out of the Minneapolis area and Minnesota. So, I worked for a large health insurance company for about 10 and a half years, for a utility company for about two, and then a financial services company for about just under 2 years as well. And I was a Dynatrace customer my last 2 years at the financial services company. So I came to know and love Dynatrace, and that's eventually why I came over to this side to work for Dynatrace as a sales engineer.
Cool, right on. All right, well, Robert, take it away. Let's get into a demo, walk us through, and folks, as this is your opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to enter them into your chat window, and we'll do our best to get them answered.
Okay. So thanks, everybody. So what we're looking at here is what we call our Smartscape topology. And this is a visual representation of our entity relationship model, which is just a really fancy way of saying that we understand the relationship between all of the different services and different pieces of infrastructure and everything else that are connected inside of your environment. And this is really important because Dynatrace, many years ago, we took a step back and we really wanted to understand what are the things that we would need to do in order to get our customers' root cause in a way that's meaningful for them. So the first thing is we need to understand the context of all the different things that are running inside of your dynamic hybrid multi-cloud environment. And what I mean by that is you have a lot of containers inside of your Kubernetes environment that are constantly spinning up and spinning down. You probably have Lambda or Azure functions inside of your cloud environment that are constantly spinning up and spinning down. With Dynatrace, we can automatically and dynamically map and discover those relationship between all of those different things that are running in your hybrid cloud. And then we can connect the dots between how they're all interconnected. And the reason that that's important is because when we start to try and get answers from all of the different data that we have inside of Dynatrace, whether it's in APM, metrics, logs, real user monitoring, or even application security, we're going to leverage those relationships across the entire platform in order for you, the customer, to get a lot more value out of that data. So, in addition to understanding what services are talking to what other services, we also want to understand where these different things actually run inside of our environment. And what I mean by that is, so for example, we have a service, and then that service runs on a process, and that process runs on a host, and eventually that host has to run somewhere, whether that's on prem, maybe it's in your Azure or AWS environment, wherever that happens to be. Dynatrace automatically maps that relationship. So we talked about both the vertical and the horizontal relationships. So we take that information together, and then we create this Smartscape topology so that we can really start to put together the pieces. The other thing that you need in order to get root cause that's valuable as a customer is all of this has to be automatic. Well, how do you actually do that? So with Dynatrace, we have one agent, and it's literally one agent that you install no matter the different supported technology type, whether it's Java, .NET, PHP, etc. Right? Instead of having a separate agent for all these different technologies, with Dynatrace, you literally just have one agent, and that one agent automatically instruments, and it also automatically detects and puts together the pieces for this relationship entity model, right? So once we've installed the Dynatrace One agent inside of our environment, we can actually see the different hosts. So if we take a look at this, we can see that there's a number of different hosts inside of this environment that are a mix of Windows, Linux, uh, Kubernetes, and a number of other different things. But if we actually want to click inside of one of these hosts to get a little bit more information, we can see that this is a Windows server that's running in AWS. We go ahead and click into it. And then Dynatrace is going to give us more information about this specific host. So out of the box, Dynatrace is also collecting those infrastructure metrics that you would know and love. So things such as CPU, memory, disk, and network on that particular host. So Dynatrace is also getting you that infrastructure level view for that host out of the box with the same agent. So again, we're using that same one agent that we use for APM in order to instrument all these different technologies. We're also going to get that infrastructure information as well. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that these are the processes that have been automatically discovered by the Dynatrace One agent. And this is incredibly helpful for your teams because, as you can see, I have a number of different technologies on this host. So we have Apache, we have some Tomcat services, we have .NET and other things that are on this host. Well, instead of me having to tell Dynatrace, hey, these are the technologies that are here, use an agent for Tomcat, use another one for Apache, and so on and so forth. Instead, with Dynatrace, it's automatically going to discover those. And as soon as a new process is started, we're automatically going to inject our code modules into those processes to give you that level of visibility. So if we go ahead and scroll back up again, we can also see other information about this host that's automatically being ingested. So because this is actually running in the cloud, Dynatrace is also smart enough in order to bring that additional context, right? So context is king. In this case, we're also pulling those AWS tags that are on those EC2 instances. We're automatically enriching the data inside of Dynatrace with no additional configuration. And if we scroll down here, we can see all the additional information that we need to know about that host. So what type of instance type is it? Where is it running? What region? And all that information that we're going to need in order to be able to understand this EC2 instance in context as well. So now that we have our service or our server instrumented, we have our services instrumented, and we're getting those infrastructure metrics. Now, what can we do with the data with Dynatrace? So when things break, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And this is what makes me excited about Dynatrace. So in this example, we have a problem with 2 applications, 10 different services, and 1 piece of infrastructure. They're all related to the same problem. So when something breaks, Dynatrace is going to create this problem for us, and it's going to tell us 3 important things. First, what was the business impact? So when things break, we need to understand, what does that mean to the business, right? Um, we all have lots of applications and services that run inside of our environment, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to understand how that affects our business. So in this case, we can see that there's 773 users that are affected by this particular problem. And with our integration with user tagging, with real user monitoring, we can actually name those users by name. And we'll show you an example of that in a little bit. And then there's 2.8 million service calls that are also affected by this particular problem. So in addition to the business impact, we also want to see what the effect is of this problem on the applications and services. So as we scroll down, we can see that there's an application here called angular.easytravel.com. And the impact to that is that the error rate has increased significantly for that application. And then there's another web application that's also impacted by the same problem. So we can see here that the response time exceeds the auto-detected baseline by 162%. So with Dynatrace, not only are we automatically instrumenting your applications and services, but we're also going to baseline those metrics for you as well out of the box. This is going to save your teams a huge amount of time and effort instead of having to manually define thresholds for all of these different metrics and services. Dynatrace for your applications and services is just going to automatically baseline that and then combine that data with that entity relationship model we were looking at earlier to give you multi-dimensional baselining. So we go up and we look on the right-hand side. Most importantly, Dynatrace is giving us the root cause. So great, we can see the impact of the business. We can see which applications were affected by it, but why? Why were they impacted? So in this case, we can see that there's a service called Check Destination. Dynatrace is smart enough to take that context that we were looking at earlier and connect the dots for you out of the box. So Dynatrace can say, this Check Destination service is the one that's impacting these 2 web applications. And this is awesome, because if you think about the possibilities of this, being able to automatically connect the dots between this service on the back end and how that actually impacts these other applications and services, it's going to save your teams a huge amount of time, not only in identifying these problems, but getting to the answers quickly. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that there was also a deployment event that actually happened at the same time that this problem was created. So this is a great example of an integration where we're actually telling Dynatrace through an API call from ServiceNow to say, hey, Dynatrace, there was actually a change, a code change to this application at the same time that this problem started. And in there, we can include all the information that you would need, including who actually approved the change, who's the owner for the change, backlinks to your different CI systems, so that you can take that information in context and again understand these things at a deeper level. If we scroll down a little bit, we can actually see a visual resolution path. And this is awesome because this is automatically created for this individual problem. Dynatrace is connecting these dots for you. It's taking all these different events that are happening inside of the environment for the things that are pertinent to this specific issue and telling you exactly what they are and where they happen. So if we pause this here real quick, we can see that there's 55 ongoing events in 13 different components. So I used to work in a command center and I used to sit in a room with 26 70-inch screens wrapped around the room. And I was the human event correlation machine. This is exactly what I did for a living for 4 years. So we would have to try and understand, okay, if this piece of infrastructure over here has a problem, and now I'm getting calls from customers for an application over here, are they related? If they are related, how are they related? What is the commonality between these two disparate events? Or are they not actually disparate? Are they actually part of the same problem? So what happens a lot of times in these large enterprises, you end up getting to a room and everybody's doing this because the application guys have their tool, the infrastructure guys have their tool, mainframe, and so on, right? But with Dynatrace, we can see this is that check destination service that we were just talking about a little bit earlier. And we can follow that service dependency chain all the way up through all the other services that it calls and talks to where the application actually is and where users log in to that website. So we can see exactly how those users are impacted by this particular
Hey,
problem.
Robert.
Yes,
Before
sir.
you leave that, first off,
Oh,
is my audio back okay now? Like, is it still
yes,
choppy?
much better.
Is much better. Okay. Apologies, folks, for the beginning. Not sure what was going on there, but this view. There's a guy on my team, Jason Bortolotti. He likes to explain this as, what we're doing is we're generating effectively a automatically drawing out what you would draw out on a whiteboard, right? Like that's basically what this is doing is it's connecting the dots. And what's more important is the fact that in most organizations that have disparate monitoring tools, like you were saying, you might be monitoring at your OS level and you have a different set of tools at your process level, and you have a different set of tools in your application, a different set of tools at your web tier, and externally a different set of tools, and you're using something else for your logs. When you got this problem, all of those tools are lit up red. None of them can tell you the root cause of the issue because they're all entirely unaware of each other. And that's at the heart of the magic of what you just showed us.
Absolutely. Yep, exactly. It really kind of takes the mystery out of this. And it's like when you were in math class in elementary school, you got to show your work, right? Like how did you get to that root cause? What were the things that actually went into it? What I really like about this is that it shows you exactly which entities were involved and what events Dynatrace is looking at in order to come to that conclusion. So there's really no black box nature to this. We're showing you exactly how we got there. So this is great information to provide to stakeholders or other individuals inside of your organization that are trying to understand this event in greater context. So they want to understand, okay, we had a degradation in service, but there are going to be developers inside of your organization that are going to need deeper amounts of information in order to understand these type of issues at a much deeper level, right? So you telling me that the check destination service is the cause for my application becoming slow is great, but my developers are going to need more, right? They want deeper answers and a deeper level of understanding of what actually happened. So Dynatrace can also provide that as well. So what we can do is we can actually analyze that response time degradation. So if you go ahead and click on this button, Dynatrace is going to do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, right? So instead of you having to sift through all the traces and metrics and logs all by yourself, instead, Dynatrace is going to help analyze that data for you. So in this example, Dynatrace is saying, hey, Mr. Customer, that increase in time is not in interaction with services or queues. It's not the database, but it is in that service execution time. So we can tell if we click on this that this big red bar here on the right-hand side is telling us that, hey, Mr. Customer, this was the large increase in time that was actually spent in code execution for this specific issue. So I like to call this fault domain isolation. Oftentimes, half the battle inside of most organizations is just trying to understand where that problem really is. Is it really the database? Is it really the network, or is it really the application, right?
No,
So this level of
Robert, it's great that you're showing this because I've talked with people who have come from using other approaches, and they've got literally hundreds of dashboards that feed data, get fed data from all sorts of different places, and at 2 o'clock in the morning when they get woken up, the first thing that they have to ask themselves is, what dashboard do I go look at,
yeah,
right? And then they take a stab in the dark and hopefully they get something that gives them a pointer or a clue. With Dynatrace and this Davis AI, it's just giving you an answer. Like, you literally, oh, hey, there's a problem. Here's the problem. Here's the entity that has the problem. And to your point, that fault domain isolation, when I click into trying to understand the problem, there it's telling me, don't spend time looking at your database. Don't spend time looking at your message queues. This is all code execution. Very,
exactly.
very cool stuff, man. Keep going.
Absolutely. So it's great that we can see that the time was spent in this additional, the additional time is spent in code execution. But again, we want a deeper level of understanding for our developers so they can really kind of get at the core, kind of that crux of the issue here. So with Dynatrace, the other thing that we can do is with that tracing and deep level of information that we're getting from PeerPass, which is our distributed tracing technology, we also want to understand at a code level where that time is being spent. So with the fidelity of the data that we're able to collect with PeerPass, we're able to do what's called method hotspotting. So we'll go ahead and we'll click on View Method Hotspots. And what I mean by fidelity of data is this is where Dynatrace can give you, instead of just wall clock time in the traces and the time that's being spent in the methods, we're breaking it down by how much time is actually spent in code execution or locking, waiting, disk, or network, just based on the information that's contained within those distributed traces. So now Dynatrace can also show you this call tree. So if you want, you can continue to expand this until you find where the time is spent, or you can just say, hey, Dynatrace, take me straight to the method that's actually consuming the most amount of time. And right here, it's this calculate section index. We put a loop in here in order to create the degradation in performance. But now in your team, you can take this information back to your product owner and say, I know that this is the method that's actually consuming the most amount of resources or is the cause of the problem. So this actually happened when I was on the client side and we were part of a large AWS cloud migration. So we started migrating, we moved our first application to the cloud, and we were all sitting around a table before COVID. We moved the first application, we turned it on, and it didn't work. And everybody's looking at each other going, uh-oh, now what?
Uh-oh.
So with Dynatrace, we went in and we looked at this level of detail for that code level method hotspotting. And we looked and we saw that there was a particular method that was consuming a significant amount of time versus everything else. And the lead developer looked at me and he said, I know that method because I wrote that 10 years ago. But now that I know that that's the problem, this is awesome because
Yeah.
now I can go to my product owner and I could say, cool, just give me one sprint or 2 weeks, however long your sprints are. I can fix the problem. They fixed it and then they got to move on, right? So instead of the alternative, which in a cloud migration, speed is name of the game. So instead of going on this fishing expedition for weeks or possibly months or years guessing at where that problem actually is, you can just go right down to that method level hotspot.
I find this method level hotspot just so useful. Like the story I have is, we're working with a customer who is, they're having an issue. If we looked at the end user response times, it looks like they've got these long sort of network requests that are happening, and
Mhm.
they, just are struggling to figure it out because the network tools, the network tooling, everything's telling them that the network is fine. There's no drop connections. There's everything looked fine. And what we found was that if we went in and looked at the method level, we saw that the network time was being consumed, but what was happening was the requests were starting to pool up, because web servers, they typically only support a certain number of requests at any given time. And they started to see this, basically what was happening was these requests weren't being freed, and then you're getting this pooling effect, and it showed as network time in the method hotspot. So it immediately allowed someone to go in there and figure out what was causing the issue. They thought the network team loved it, because their network team was like, wasn't our problem. This was all on the web server. This is a configuration issue.
Exactly. It really just saves you, like you said, from playing that blame game, right?
Yeah.
That fault domain isolation story is just such a powerful story. All right, so this is a great example of a response time degradation issue. I'm going to change gears a little bit. This next problem is for a service that's actually having or experiencing failure rates. I'm not going to go through the entire problem card, but just to kind of give you a different example of how does it look in Dynatrace when, instead of response time, now we're looking at requests themselves are actually failing. So there's a couple different things that I think are really interesting. So first, to level set, we have 164 users that are impacted. We're going to take a look at one of those in a second. But now, again, we have multiple applications. In this case, we actually have some synthetic monitors that are also related to this problem. So again, Dynatrace is smart enough to understand that relationship between this backend service and how that's impacting not just applications, but also synthetics, which are part of our fully featured platform, in order to understand these issues in greater context. But down here, we also have a mobile application and a web application. Well, that's interesting. So both that mobile and web application, if we go to the visual resolution path, now that we learned how to do that, we can see both of them have a dependency on this shared easy travel service as well. Well, that's interesting. So if we go back, there's a couple different ways that we can do this. The easy way that we looked at earlier was, let's just say, hey, Dynatrace, instead of me digging through all of the metrics, logs, traces, and all that kind of stuff by myself, I could say, hey, Dynatrace, I want you to analyze that failure degradation for me. So we're going to go ahead and click the button. And Dynatrace is going to look at all those things that I just mentioned. So first, it's going to tell us, hey, these are the reasons for the request failing. So we're getting this 500. And we see these are the actual requests that we're experiencing that. And down here, we're getting information from the distributed traces. So Dynatrace is trying to pull some root cause for that from the traces, and it's invalid traveler cost item exception. Well, that's a little closer to the answer. But what would be great is if we had a little more context. So if we scroll down, we can see that there are actually logs associated with this. It's really important to talk about what I didn't have to do here.
Yeah.
I did not have to write a log query. I didn't have to go to my SharePoint site and think to myself, which index did we put those logs in? Oh gosh, I can't remember. I got to go to the SharePoint and look. And then once I find that index, go back to my log management tool and start to construct a query. Okay, this index for this application during this time frame, and hope that I find the appropriate logs. Instead, what Dynatrace has done is it's automatically associated the appropriate log records with this and analyze them for us because they're pertinent to this specific problem. And so now we get that additional information. So instead of just invalid traveler cost item exception, we can now tell our developers we had error while accessing item 6 in a list of cost factors. There's 5 elements in the array. Programming starts at 0. There you go. So this is how we can leverage all of those 3 pillars of observability together with context. And context is king in order to get to the answer faster.
That is so super cool, Robert. I got to tell you, we haven't typically, in getting to know Dynatrace sessions, we haven't gone into that level of detail on an error, and we haven't shown that automatic connection between the here is the actual failing request, and here's the log that got generated from that, and the fact that you didn't have to do anything. It just automatically showed up there. It's just like mic drop moment, like that sort of thing. Happy dance. Like it's pretty incredible to try to do this to try to do this, you would have to coordinate, probably a half a dozen different types of technology, all talking together, the right way at the right time to even try to replicate this. And this,
Yep.
from our standpoint, is super exciting because what does it do for you? Is it just provides you laser focus. You do not have to take your most expensive human capital, the architects, the people that understand the applications, inside and out. You don't have to have them sifting through a log file looking for that needle in the haystack. Dynatrace just goes, here's your needle right here.
Absolutely. Having been on the customer side and having had a centralized log tool and a separate, it really hits home, right? Because it's one of those things where it's hard, right, to take all of these things in context and to do that. And so I'm seeing a lot of my customers are just having a huge amount of success with this. It's super exciting. This is available today. It's in the product. There's nothing additional you have to do. Like, it just works, right? So this is great, and this is, again, another really great way to get more information for our developers. But we talked about the business earlier, and I want to come back to that. So changing gears a little bit, but talking about this exact same problem, we've looked at what we would give a developer for this problem, but now I want to look at this exact same problem through the eyes of a customer. So ultimately, our applications and services inside of our enterprise, they're there for a reason. They're there to service our customers, right? But when these problems happen, we want to understand and get more context around what was that customer's experience. So with Dynatrace, we also have what we call real user monitoring. And that is also a seamless part of the platform. What I mean is that one agent, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that same one agent will automatically instrument your web and application services with real user monitoring out of the box with no additional configuration. And this is an example of what we're going to get. So in this case, we can actually see the user identified by name. We get a lot of other great information, such as their operating system, their screen resolution, where they're coming from, their internet service provider, the browser and the browser version, whether or not it was a desktop, a mobile, a tablet device, etc. But you'll notice here in the middle as well, we're also pulling additional information from this individual user session. And this is really important because Dynatrace is also able to extract data from the data layer of those real user monitoring sessions. And the reason why that's important is because there might be information in there that's helpful to you as a company, such as if we lose this user's transaction, how much revenue are we losing out on as a company? What was this customer's loyalty status? Now, interestingly enough, that customer's loyalty status that we can see here, it's called, this customer happened to be a platinum customer, is actually coming from the backend service calls, and we're pulling them through the backend through a request attribute, and we're associating them with this specific individual real user monitoring session. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But we want to understand what that user saw when they were experiencing this issue. So with Dynatrace, we also provide the ability to use what's called session replay, where we're actually recreating a representation of what that user was actually experiencing when they were using this application. So we'll see here that the user is going to go ahead and log in. They're going to try and search for a journey, and then we're automatically masking login data, credit card information, all that kind of stuff. So it's automatic out of the box. You can fully customize it as you need to. They're going to get an error message, click the button, it doesn't work, and they're going to click a whole bunch more times, right? How many people have done this, right? Where a button doesn't work and you just go ahead and just keep clicking on that button, you get frustrated, and you exit the application because it doesn't work. So here we can see that we've lost a conversion. So we've lost a transaction because that error message got an error, or excuse me, that customer got an error E1234. Well, what does E1234 actually mean? So that's where with real user monitoring, we can actually get down to that individual action. So with Dynatrace, we can see the individual page loads as well as the XHR actions. So when you have dynamic JavaScript that's firing off requests to other things, Dynatrace can automatically monitor those. But if we keep scrolling a little bit, we can see that the step that they had the issue with was on the validation of the credit card. And this is where
Wait,
we
wait,
get
wait, wait. Before you go there, Robert,
okay,
close that for a second. And what was below that?
the rage click. Yes.
I
So
love
this
that.
is they tried to validate the credit card. Yes, and it didn't work. So we saw that earlier in the replay where they're clicking on it and it's just not working. They get frustrated and they close it out, right? So with Dynatrace, we automatically track that rage click so you can see exactly where that actually happened in the flow of the different actions the user was taking.
We've all been there, folks. You've all seen that. It's like, why won't you take? And you're like just hammering away, trying to go, oh, make this work, make this work.
Exactly. Awesome. So the next thing is we want to understand what actually happened with this validation of credit card. So if we expand this, we get a little bit of a high level information. So how much time was spent on the server, the network, and some metadata about the actual request. But let's go ahead and click on perform waterfall analysis. And
All right.
this is going to
Well,
give,
Robert, one second. While we're waiting for the waterfall to show, so
Mhm.
we had a question from the audience here. Robson was asking a question specifically. Do we have an information about how we do that parameterization? So, Robson, just have a look in the chat. We've actually pasted a link, which basically will take you to how you define your user action and session properties. Because and you can see them here actually in the user action that Robert's got showing. Those are our user action properties. So you can have user action properties that are associated with someone doing something, a user action like this, or you could have a session property which is associated with the overall user session. That link will take you to documentation that describes how you can set this up. Keep going, Robert.
Yep, absolutely. So we can actually see a breakdown of what requests were actually fired off once the user clicked that button. And so in this case, it was actually an XHR request. And that XHR fires off two requests, one to validate credit card and the other one to booking. So if we go ahead and highlight this, we click and then we can actually view the backend trace. And what we're doing is Dynatrace is automatically connecting the dots between this individual real user monitoring session, an individual action within that session, and what's actually happening on the back end. So we go ahead and click trace, view the trace. And now we can see that when you go to REST bookings, this fires off a request to store booking and then configuration service and then on down to these other services. We see that there's an issue here in store booking. And we can see over here that there's an error that's related to this request. So we're going to go ahead and click on errors. And down here, here's our invalid traveler cost item exception that we were looking at earlier in the additional information that we found through the analysis. So again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, when we analyzed that failure rate degradation, we did get the same answer. And it was good to get this back-end information very quickly when you need it. So if you just need to click that button and get the answer. But it's also important for other areas of your business to understand how that actually affects the user. What did they see? What did they experience? And how can we put that in context for the rest of the business?
That's so cool, Robert. Very, very cool stuff. This marriage between, this is taking the promise of observability, the marriage between our metrics, with marriage between our traces and the logs, and putting it all together. And then with Dynatrace, enriching that data with additional metadata like our tags, enriching it with information like these session properties, enriching it with that topological information like what we get from the Smartscape. Being able to view things down to the code, to the method level, it really does provide, a very unique experience. There's just not a lot of other options out there in the industry that ties things together so tightly.
Absolutely. Awesome. So the next thing I want to do is I want to change gears one more time. And I want to start looking at, so now that we've looked at an individual real user monitoring session and we've seen how that connects to a problem that happens inside of an environment, we've already set up all these session properties and we've talked about that a lot, but maybe we want to start understanding those in a broader context to like take a really kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the macro of what's happening inside of our environment. And I think that's a great transition to dashboarding inside of Dynatrace, where Dynatrace has a lot of great tools to dig into that nitty gritty for those individual sessions, but we also can look at the big picture, right? So dashboarding is a great use case for that. In this example dashboard, we're looking at that AngularEasyTravel.com website, and this is a site reliability dashboard. And what I mean by that is Google popularized the practice of site reliability engineering a number of years ago. And one of the key concepts of that practice is what are called golden signals. So those are the signals that if you want to look, and they tend to be the precursors to issues happening inside of your environment. So great example of that is latency or the volume of traffic or errors inside of your environment. So this dashboard focuses on those. But in addition to that, we're also creating some service level objective tiles for key actions that we want to have happen inside of this application. So Dynatrace, we've decided to say, okay, we want our users to be able to authenticate. We want them to be able to find a journey. We want them to be able to use a credit card because we'd like them to pay for it. And then finally, we'd like them to actually book that journey. So we've decided these are the four key things. And based on that, we can take data within Dynatrace, and we can create service level objectives that allow us to track that over time and whether or not we actually are on target to meet that service level objective. But what makes Dynatrace even more unique is our ability, again, to leverage that context, that entity relationship model, to do a little bit of pre-crime based on the context and the relationship for the metrics that are used in those SLOs to tell you, hey, Mr. Customer, based on the relationship to other things inside of your environment, there may be something happening that could jeopardize this SLO inside of your environment. In addition to that, we also want to understand this service from a deeper level, so we can click into this markdown link that's part of our dashboard that takes us to another dashboard that's actually pertinent to this application. And here we're actually going to look at a booking funnel. So the idea behind this is that our users are going to take different journeys through our application and service. There's probably going to be multiple different journeys they're going to take, but this is just an example of one. So again, the customer is going to go to the home page, they're going to search, log in, and then eventually purchase. But now we want to put those individual steps in context of what's happening with abandonment rate at each one of those steps along the way as they journey through our application. How is that impacting revenue? Are we seeing an increase in errors for those individual steps? And then is there a change in response time for those actions that are associated with those individual steps as well? So again, we're taking that individual information and now we're using the power of dashboarding in order to really take a big picture view of what's happening over time to start looking for those trends and become more proactive instead of reactive and always in that firefighter mode. Finally, down at the bottom, we have the ability to slice and dice this data even further with our own uSQL query language. And so the idea behind this is, in this example, remember that E1234 error? Well, now we want to understand greater what other users had that, what was their booking amount, their trip destination, and things like their loyalty status. We can now take this data and we can start slicing it, dicing it in ways that make sense to different parts of the business because they want to understand that context. So if we go back one more time, the last thing that I want to show you on this dashboard is booking revenue. So we talked a little bit earlier about how we were collecting that revenue data. Well, what we can do with that data in the big picture now that we have it is we can start analyzing that data in different ways that is also helpful to other areas of the business and different key stakeholders. So first of all, we're looking at the total volume of requests that are actually being booked, how many had errors, but then here we're starting to total up the different amounts of revenue that are actually being collected and then averaging that out over a period of time. And then down here, we're showing different ways that we can visualize the data for other pieces of information that are also important. So in this example, bookings, we want a pie chart to understand that in different contexts. Here's a top list. We also have bar charts. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice that data to visualize it in ways that makes it easier for different stakeholders to consume it. Lastly, on the left-hand side of the page, I want to talk about conversion goals because every application and service serves a purpose, right? We don't build applications for funsies. Unfortunately, we want somebody to do a thing, right? Whether that's get to a certain page, spend a certain amount of time somewhere. We want them to do something. It doesn't always have to be an e-commerce application. I have a customer that I worked with recently that actually provided educational services. So their idea of a conversion is a student completing a test, right? That's a thing that you want somebody to be able to do. With Dynatrace, we can actually track those conversion goals because oftentimes our application support teams are measured from the business side on whether or not users are actually able to complete those conversions successfully or not. And then also bounce rate. So for those that know, bounce rate tracking is also important. So for users that'll go out to your application or service, they won't perform an action and then they'll leave. We also want to be able to track that effectively as well.
Hey,
So
Robert, could you do me a favor and click on that tile? And the reason being is that there is a little known, very, very useful view here.
mhm,
That's it right there, the bounce rate analysis on your left-hand side.
mhm.
So nobody knows about this, but it's so telling. It's so interesting. Basically, this is telling us, it's giving us the direct correlation between, in this particular case, performance and end user behavior. So you can see that the people on this particular site have very low tolerance for things being slow. So as soon as things start to slow down, even a small amount of slowdown, all of a sudden our bounce rate just climbs. So this is, again, one of those sort of hidden little gems inside of Dynatrace that very few people are aware of. But it's just, if you ever want to sit there and have a conversation with a business owner as to why performance matters, right?
Mhm.
This is the type of data that you just slide across the table and say, hey, folks, this is why performance matters. This is why we pay attention to this, because the slower the page gets, we can make a direct, we can see it, show direct evidence that causes people to navigate away from the site.
Exactly. Perfect. Being able to make decisions based on data, quantifiable data.
Data.
Yep.
Exactly. Very cool. Very cool. So, folks, do we have any last minute questions? Robert, was there any last minute things that you wanted to show? If not, I do want to wrap up with a couple of things.
Nope. I'm good.
You're good. You're good. So, for the control room folks, John, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to try this one more time because I feel really bad that at the beginning of today's session, everything started getting choppy. And the question I have, get choppy again? Is anyone still there? I
Yep,
blew it up. No. Am I here again? I think I'm. So why everything by screen sharing? Okay, never mind. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stop screen sharing. Is everyone still there? Hello? I blew it up. Totally blew it up. Hello?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Listen,
Your video is frozen, but
if everyone can hear me and you can't see the video, don't worry. I still have a Santa hat on. And that's not what's important. What's important is, folks, thank you very much for your time and thank you very much for your questions. As always, we love these getting to know Dynatrace sessions. They're fabulous for us because we get to answer great questions from you folks, and we'll be doing them again next year. Okay, thanks, Mary. It's good to know that there are people still here. So, folks, we're gonna wrap up today's session. Robert, thank you so much for walking us through that demo. That was an awesome demo. We covered lots of things that we don't usually get to cover on Getting to Know Dynatrace. And folks, as I mentioned, this is our last Getting to Know Dynatrace segment of this season. We'll be coming back next year with a brand new season of Getting to Know Dynatrace. Before we go, a couple of last minute things that I want to make mention is the upcoming webinar with our CTO, Bernd Greifenader. Please attend that. He's going to talk about 4 things that CIOs need to be thinking about for 2023. And then again, our Perform conference coming up in February. And with that, folks, I wish everyone to have a very safe and happy holidays. And we will see you next time on getting to know Dynatrace. Ciao, folks.